When a billionaire discovers the twin daughters he raised aren't really his, but his dying brother's, he must decide. Will he let a DNA test destroy their family, or fight for a love that defies blood itself? A gust of wind burst into Henry Thompson's office, rustling the papers neatly arranged across his massive oak desk. The late afternoon sun painted long stripes of light across the polished floor, but he hardly noticed. He had been staring at the phone in front of him for several minutes, unable to make himself pick it up again. Just an hour earlier, he had received the call he had dreaded for months. His older brother, Simon, was dying. Henry had never thought the day would come when he would be asked to stand at Simon's bedside and say goodbye. Despite everything that had happened between them, old grudges, unspoken resentments, they were still family. He drove to the hospital with the city blurring past him, unable to shake the sense that he was heading towards something that would change his life forever. When he entered the dim, antiseptic room, he almost didn't recognize Simon. His brother had always been strong, proud, sometimes impossibly stubborn. But the man lying in that narrow hospital bed was small and broken, his skin paper thin against the bones of his face. Simon's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, Henry thought he saw relief there. "Henry," Simon's voice was just a dry whisper, cracked and uncertain. "I'm here," Henry said quietly, moving closer to the bed. "There's something I need to tell you." "You don't have to say anything," Henry tried to reassure him. "You need to rest." But Simon clutched his wrist with surprising strength, his fingers digging into Henry's skin. "No, listen. It's about the girls." Henry felt a coldness spread across his chest. "What about Ellie and Sarah?" Simon closed his eyes as if gathering the last of his strength. "They're not yours." For a moment, Henry couldn't process the words. He thought perhaps he had misheard, that the machines beeping softly around them had distorted Simon's voice. "What are you talking about?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Simon's breathing rattled. "I loved Laura, your wife. We had an affair ago. The girls, they're mine." The room seemed to tilt around Henry. He felt as if he were no longer standing on solid ground. "You're delirious," he managed to say, though his throat felt tight. "You don't know what you're saying." Simon's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The next moment, the monitors gave a long, shrill tone that seemed to echo through the corridor. Nurses rushed in, pushing Henry gently out of the way, but he already knew it was too late. His brother was gone. He stood there in the doorway, staring at Simon's still face. 1,000 memories came flooding back. How they used to climb trees together as boys. How Simon had defended him from bullies. How they had grown apart over the years. Now, the last thing Simon had ever said to him was a confession that felt like a knife driven straight into his heart. Henry left the hospital in a daze, barely remembering the drive home. When he walked into the quiet foyer of his house, Ellie and Sarah came running to him, their little arms wrapping around his legs, their identical blue eyes looking up at him with complete trust. "Daddy, you're home," Ellie said, her smile lighting up her small face. He tried to smile back, but something inside him had cracked. As he held them close, he kept hearing Simon's voice over and over again. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure what he believed anymore. The morning after Simon's funeral, Henry sat alone in the kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. He hadn't slept more than an hour. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his brother's face and heard that final confession in the hospital room. No matter how hard he tried to convince himself it had just been the rambling of a dying man, he couldn't shake the feeling that it might have been the truth. Ellie and Sarah were still upstairs, their quiet voices drifting through the ceiling as they played in their bedroom. They had no idea that anything was wrong, no understanding of how fragile everything suddenly felt. For them, life hadn't changed. For Henry, everything was in question. He picked up the phone several times, setting it back down before he could dial. He didn't want to call the lab. He didn't want to ask for a test that might prove the daughters he had loved more than anything in the world weren't really his. But the uncertainty was worse than any truth could be. Finally, with hands that trembled more than he cared to admit, he called the genetic testing center. The woman on the line had a bright, professional voice. She assured him the process would be discreet and quick. She explained that a technician could come to the house to collect samples. He listened in silence, feeling as if he were watching someone else's life from far away. When he hung up, he rested his forehead against the cool surface of the kitchen table and closed his eyes. That afternoon, while the girls were napping, a technician arrived. She was a small woman in a navy uniform who greeted him gently as if she already knew how much this hurt him. Henry felt his throat tighten when she explained the procedure. She handed him 2 sterile swabs and he climbed the stairs to the girls' room, trying to keep his voice calm. Ellie sat cross-legged on her bed, braiding Sarah's hair. When she saw the swabs, she tilted her head. "Daddy, what's that for?" "It's just a little test," he said, forcing a smile. "Like when you went to the doctor last year, remember?" Sarah's blue eyes searched his face. "Are we sick?" "No. No. Sweethearts, you're perfectly healthy." They each opened their mouths without complaint, trusting him completely. He collected the samples, his heart aching with every moment. When he handed the swabs back to the technician, he wished more than anything that he could take it all back. The woman promised the results would be ready within a few days. As soon as she left, Henry sank into the nearest chair and buried his face in his hands. He had thought losing Laura had been the worst pain he would ever know. Now he realized there were deeper wounds, the ones you couldn't even name. In the evenings, he tried to pretend nothing was wrong. He cooked their favorite dinners, read bedtime stories, and kissed them goodnight. But he couldn't stop thinking about the envelope that would soon arrive, holding the answer he both needed and feared. Sometimes after the girls had fallen asleep, he would stand in their doorway, just watching them breathe. One night, as he closed Sarah's door, he leaned his forehead against the frame and whispered to himself that whatever happened, he would not abandon them. But in the silence of the house, he could almost hear Simon's voice again, confessing everything. And no matter how many times Henry repeated his promise, the doubt remained, like a dark shadow he couldn't escape. 3 days later, the envelope arrived. Henry knew exactly what it was the moment he saw it on the silver tray by the front door, the lab's name printed neatly in the corner. For a long time, he didn't pick it up. He just stood there, his hand hovering over it, telling himself he could wait 1 more hour, 1 more day, that he didn't have to know yet. But pretending was no longer possible. He took the envelope into his study and shut the door, locking it behind him. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows and caught the framed photos on the shelves. Ellie and Sarah splashing in the lake last summer. The 3 of them smiling at the zoo. Laura holding the girls when they were still babies. He couldn't look at any of it. His fingers trembled as he broke the seal and pulled out the papers. It took him a moment to focus on the words. The language was clinical, impersonal, but there was no way to soften the meaning. The probability of paternity was 0. He read it again and again, hoping he had misunderstood, that there was some hidden clause explaining the results were inconclusive. There wasn't. The world seemed to tilt and he sank into the leather chair behind his desk, the papers slipping from his hand to the floor. All the air went out of his lungs. His heart felt as if it had been squeezed in a fist. He thought of Laura, of her laughter, of the way she used to kiss the girls' foreheads as if they were the most precious beings on earth. Had she known this secret would one day surface and tear him apart? He didn't know how long he sat there before he heard the girls' voices drifting in from the hallway. They were arguing over which movie to watch that evening. The normalcy of it pierced him in a way nothing else could. He pressed his palm over his mouth, trying to hold back the sob rising in his throat. At dinner, he couldn't eat. He kept glancing at them, searching their faces for some sign of Simon he had never noticed before. But they still looked exactly the same to him. Still the 2 little miracles he had cradled in his arms the night they were born. Ellie noticed he was quiet and reached across the table to touch his hand. "Are you sad, Daddy?" Her question nearly broke him. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to smile. "Just tired, honey. It's been a long week." That night, after he read them their bedtime story, Ellie and Sarah wrapped their arms around his neck and kissed his cheeks the way they always did. He lingered in the doorway after he turned off the light, watching their small shapes curled up under the blankets. He could barely remember his life before them. He didn't want to imagine one without them in it. He went back downstairs where the envelope still lay on the floor. He picked it up and slipped it into the bottom drawer of his desk, as if hiding it there might somehow make it less real. But even with it out of sight, the truth echoed in his mind with every heartbeat. Simon had been telling the truth. He poured himself a glass of whiskey he didn't even want and stood at the window staring out at the dark lawn. His whole life had been built on a lie. And yet, when he thought about the girls, he knew there was no possible way he could love them any less. Even if they were not his by blood, they were his in every way that mattered. But as he raised the glass to his lips, he wondered how he would ever find the courage to tell them what he had learned. The morning after he received the DNA results, Henry woke to the sound of rain tapping against the windows. The house felt too quiet, as if even the walls were holding their breath. He lay in bed for a long time, staring up at the ceiling, replaying every memory of Laura he could still hold on to clearly. He thought of the day he had proposed, of the way she had looked at him in the candlelight, her eyes full of something he had believed was only for him. He thought of the nights she had stayed up with the babies, exhausted but determined to care for them herself. He wondered how much of it had been a lie. Eventually, he got up and went to his study. The envelope with the test results was still locked in the bottom drawer, but he didn't need to look at it again. He sat at his desk, turning the gold wedding band on his finger. A memory came to him so vivid it felt like someone else had placed it in his mind. Laura sitting in this very room, her face pale, her hands folded in her lap as she tried to say something she couldn't quite bring herself to finish. He had dismissed it at the time, thinking it was just exhaustion or sadness after childbirth. Now he realized she might have been trying to confess everything. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. As if answering a question he hadn't spoken out loud, the phone rang. When he answered, a woman's voice spoke politely, but with a note of sympathy that made his stomach tighten. She introduced herself as Diane Miller, an attorney handling Simon's estate. She said there were documents Henry needed to review, letters Simon had left behind. He agreed to meet her that afternoon, though he wasn't sure he had the strength to hear any more secrets. The rain had turned into a cold drizzle by the time he arrived at the law office. Diane Miller was younger than he expected, her brown hair pulled into a neat twist, her eyes watchful but not unkind. She offered her condolences for Simon's passing and then handed him a small stack of papers held together with a black clip. "Your brother asked that these be given to you personally," she said. "He wanted you to have the chance to read them in private before any other matters of the estate were addressed." Henry thanked her and left without opening the folder. He drove home slowly, unable to stop wondering what could possibly be left for Simon to say that would matter more than what he had already confessed. When he finally sat down in the study and unclipped the papers, he felt his chest tighten again. On top was a sealed envelope in Laura's handwriting. His hands shook as he broke the seal and unfolded the letter. As soon as he read the first line, tears burned his eyes. "Henry, if you're reading this, it means the truth is no longer something I can keep hidden. I don't know if you can ever forgive me. I don't know if I even deserve it. All I can tell you is that I loved you with all my heart, even when I was too weak to be honest." He pressed his thumb against the ink as if he could somehow feel the warmth of her hand there. "I made mistakes that I can never take back. I hurt you in ways I never meant to. And I hurt the girls most of all because I knew that someday you might look at them and wonder if they were really yours. But you need to understand this. You are their father in every way that matters. They have always known you as the man who held them, who comforted them, who loved them without condition. Nothing can ever change that." He had to pause to wipe his eyes before he could keep going. "If you can ever find it in yourself to forgive me, I beg you not to punish them for my failings. They are innocent. They need you more than anyone. And you are the best father they could ever have. I know that in your heart you already understand this. Love isn't made of blood. It's made of everything you've given them, all the memories you've built together." He folded the letter carefully, pressing it flat against his chest. He thought of Ellie and Sarah upstairs playing with their dolls, waiting for him to read to them before bed. He thought of how they still looked at him as if he were their whole world. In that moment, something settled deep inside him, a kind of quiet certainty that no matter what Simon's confession or a lab report said, nothing could sever the bond he had with his daughters. He could hate Laura for her betrayal, he could mourn the life he had believed was real, but he would not abandon the girls who called him daddy. When he finally rose from the chair, the rain had stopped and pale sunlight spilled through the windows. For the first time in days, he felt as if he could breathe again. He put the letter away with the rest of the papers, locking them in the drawer, not because he wanted to pretend they hadn't happened, but because he knew that the truth they held would never again define his love for his children. That evening, Henry decided he could not keep carrying the truth alone. He had thought about waiting until the girls were older, maybe old enough to understand the complexity of what he had discovered, but something in Laura's letter had changed his mind. If he let fear drive him, it would grow into shame and resentment. He would not allow that to poison what they had built together. After dinner, when the dishes were stacked in the sink and the girls were sprawled across the living room carpet coloring pictures, he sat down on the sofa and called them over. His voice was calm, but inside he felt as though his ribs were splintering around his heart. Ellie climbed into his lap without hesitation, her head resting against his chest, while Sarah settled close to his side, holding one of his hands in both of hers. He watched them for a moment, trying to memorize every small detail, the softness of their hair, the way they smelled faintly of soap and crayons, the trust in their eyes. He cleared his throat, afraid his voice might shake. He told them that he needed to talk to them about something important, something about their family. They listened without interrupting, their bright blue eyes wide and solemn. He explained as gently as he could that sometimes grown-ups made mistakes, and sometimes people you love keep secrets because they're scared or because they think it will protect you. He said that before their mother had died, she had made a choice to keep a secret about where they came from. Ellie's small brow furrowed. She asked, "What kind of secret?" Henry had to look away for a second before he could continue. He told them that Simon had been part of their lives in a way they hadn't known, that he was not just their uncle, and that he was by blood their father. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah looked down at her hands as if she were trying to understand whether they had changed somehow just by hearing the truth. Ellie shifted in his lap and lifted her face to his, her eyes searching his for something she could not name. "Does that mean you're not our dad anymore?" she asked in a voice so quiet it barely carried across the space between them. Henry felt his heart splinter all over again. He pulled her closer and wrapped his other arm around Sarah, gathering them both against him so they could feel how steady his heartbeat still was. He told them that being a father was not something that could be undone by a piece of paper. He said that he had been there the day they were born, that he had fed them bottles in the middle of the night, that he had kissed every scraped knee and held them when they were sick, and that no test could erase any of those moments. Sarah finally looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. "But you still love us, right?" The words were so small and so brave that he almost broke down completely. He kissed the top of her head and then Ellie's and told them there was nothing they could ever do or ever learn that would make him love them any less. He promised them that he would always be their dad, no matter what anyone else said. The girls pressed their faces into his chest, their little arms clinging to his sides. He sat there holding them as the light outside the windows slowly faded into darkness. In that quiet, he felt something shifting inside him. The grief was still there, sharp and undeniable, but it no longer felt as if it was going to drown him. Later, when he tucked them into bed and turned off the lamp, he stood in the doorway a while, watching the steady rise and fall of their breathing. He knew the coming days would still bring questions and confusion, that they would all have to learn how to live with this new truth. But for the first time since Simon's confession, he felt certain of one thing. The love he carried for these girls was unshakable, rooted so deeply in his soul that nothing could ever take it away. The following week brought an unexpected call that pulled Henry deeper into the labyrinth Simon had left behind. He was in his office going through quarterly reports he could hardly focus on when the phone rang. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Emily Carter, the executor of Simon's personal affairs. Her voice was steady but tinged with hesitation as though she wasn't sure how much he could bear. She explained that Simon had left additional instructions regarding another child, a daughter named Haley, who had recently turned 19 and had never met her father. The name meant nothing to Henry at first, and for a moment he wondered if it could be some clerical error, but Emily patiently explained that Simon had been supporting the girl financially for years. Simon's final wish was that Henry should contact her and if possible let her know about her half-sisters. Henry's first instinct was to refuse. He felt overwhelmed by everything that had already been unearthed, and the thought of introducing one more fracture into their lives made his stomach knot. But after he hung up the phone, he sat alone in his study, turning the idea over in his mind. If there was a young woman out there who had spent her life not knowing who her father really was, then maybe she deserved the same chance at the truth that he had finally given Ellie and Sarah. He knew what it felt like to be kept in the dark, and he couldn't bring himself to inflict that same uncertainty on someone else. 2 days later, he called the number Emily had provided. Haley answered after the third ring, her voice cautious and soft. He introduced himself, explaining that he was Simon's brother and that there were things she needed to hear. There was a long silence on the line. He almost thought she might hang up, but then she said she would meet with him. They agreed to talk the next afternoon at a cafe halfway between her college and his home. Henry arrived early and chose a quiet table near the window. The rain had started again, drumming steadily on the glass, and he watched the passers-by hurrying along the sidewalk under umbrellas. He felt older than he ever had before, aware that this moment might change everything yet again. When Haley walked in, he recognized her immediately. She had the same chestnut hair as Ellie and Sarah, the same delicate features that reminded him painfully of Simon. She looked around until she spotted him. And then she came over and sat down without speaking. For a while, they simply regarded each other, two strangers bound by invisible threads neither of them had chosen. Finally, he told her about Simon, about the affair, about the girls who had no idea they had an older sister until a few days ago. Haley didn't interrupt, but her eyes shone with tears as she listened. She said she had always wondered why her mother never spoke about her father, why there was so much bitterness in her voice whenever she refused to answer questions. She had suspected the truth in some vague way, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a blow. When he finished, she looked down at her hands, twisting a silver ring around her finger. She asked if the girls knew about her. He told her gently that they didn't, not yet, but that he thought they deserved to meet her if she was willing. For a moment, she seemed unsure, her shoulders tense, but then she nodded. She said she had spent her whole life wishing she belonged somewhere, and maybe this was her chance. Later that evening, after he returned home, Henry sat Ellie and Sarah down again. He explained that their uncle had a daughter before they were born, that she was their sister by blood. The girls were quiet, wide-eyed, and uncertain, but not afraid. They asked if she was nice, if she would like them, if she looked like them. He assured them that Haley wanted to meet them, and that she was probably just as nervous. The next morning, the girls woke early, too excited to eat breakfast properly. Henry helped them choose their clothes and braided their hair the way Laura had done when they were smaller. When Haley arrived, standing in the doorway with a shy, tentative smile, there was a moment when no one moved. Then Sarah took a step forward and reached out her hand. Haley knelt down so they were eye to eye. And when Ellie joined them, all three of them just looked at each other as if trying to recognize something familiar in a stranger's face. Henry watched them with a strange ache in his chest, part grief and part wonder. It struck him then that even though so much had been broken, there were still new bonds waiting to be formed, connections that could grow out of the wreckage of the past. And as the girls finally embraced their sister, he felt for the first time in weeks a cautious hope that perhaps this was not the end of their family, but the beginning of something none of them had imagined. The first weeks after Haley's arrival were a delicate time for all of them. Henry quickly realized that it was not enough simply to open the door and declare themselves a family. It was one thing to tell the girls that love was stronger than blood, but it was something else entirely to watch them adjust to the presence of a sister who had always existed outside their world. Some days it felt almost natural the way Haley would sit with them at the kitchen table, helping with their coloring books or reading them stories in her quiet, warm voice. Other days, the girls became shy and withdrawn, as though afraid that this new relationship might somehow push them further away from him. Henry tried to be patient, but the uncertainty gnawed at him, especially at night when he lay awake, replaying every conversation. He worried that no matter how hard he tried, some invisible barrier would always stand between Haley and the family she had never known. He saw it in the small hesitations in her eyes, the way she sometimes hovered at the edge of a room before stepping inside, unsure whether she had the right to belong there. One evening, after the girls had gone to bed, he found Haley sitting alone on the back porch. The porch light cast a pale halo around her, and he could see that her arms were wrapped tightly around herself, as though she were bracing against something she couldn't name. He sat down beside her, the boards creaking under his weight, and for a while they both watched the wind stirring the trees at the edge of the lawn. She spoke first, her voice so soft he almost didn't hear her. She told him that part of her had always believed she was unwanted, that Simon's absence meant she was some kind of mistake everyone had agreed not to acknowledge. She confessed she didn't know how to accept the kindness she was being offered now, didn't know how to believe it was real. Henry listened without interrupting. He remembered how he had felt the night he read Laura's letter when it seemed as though everything he thought he knew had been hollow all along. He told Haley the truth, that he didn't have all the answers, that he was afraid, too, but that he was certain of one thing. The girls already looked up to her, even if they didn't have the words to say it yet. He said that no one could erase the years they had lost, but it didn't mean they couldn't start something new together. As he spoke, he realized he was also saying these things to himself, trying to believe that love could be stronger than betrayal, that family could be chosen again and again, no matter how many times it was tested. The next day, Sarah approached him in the kitchen while he was washing dishes. She stood by his side, watching the soap swirl in the water, then asked if Haley would leave now that she had met them. The question pierced him. He turned off the tap and dried his hands before kneeling to look her in the eye. He told her that Haley wasn't going anywhere unless she wanted to, that this was her home, too, if she wished it. Sarah looked uncertain, her small teeth worrying her lower lip, but finally she nodded. That afternoon, he found all three girls in the living room sitting cross-legged on the carpet. Haley was showing them how to braid friendship bracelets, her long fingers deftly working the colored threads. Ellie leaned against her shoulder, utterly absorbed. It struck him how natural the moment looked, how easily it might have been overlooked as ordinary, but he knew it was not ordinary at all. It was a fragile beginning, a gesture of trust that none of them could have imagined a few weeks earlier. Later that night, when he was tucking Ellie into bed, she hesitated and then asked if Haley was really their sister, even if she hadn't grown up with them. He sat on the edge of the mattress and told her that family wasn't just about living in the same house or sharing all the same memories. He explained that sometimes family was about showing up for each other when it mattered most. Ellie seemed to think about this for a long time, then reached out to hug him tightly around the neck. As he turned out the light and closed her door, he felt a tired but profound relief settle over him. It was still hard. It would likely be hard for a long time. But for the first time since Simon had confessed the truth, Henry felt as if all of them, himself, the girls, even Haley, were slowly learning how to trust that love could hold them together, even if nothing else had gone the way they had once believed it would. A full year had passed since the day Henry first learned the truth about Ellie and Sarah's paternity, and though so much had changed, he often marveled at how their lives had managed to settle into something that almost resembled peace. The summer sun was bright the morning of the girl's 7th birthday, pouring golden light across the kitchen counters where he stood, arranging a stack of paper plates and napkins. He could hear laughter from the backyard where Haley was helping the girls hang streamers between the fence posts, their voices high and excited in a way that made something tender and grateful swell in his chest. He thought back to that first difficult meeting with Haley in the cafe and how tentative she had been when she first walked into the house, carrying all the weight of a childhood spent wondering if she was wanted. Over the months, she had become something steady for Ellie and Sarah to hold on to, part friend, part gentle guide. He had seen the girls come to trust her, to look for her when they were scared or uncertain. And he knew Haley had come to trust them, too. More than once he had glimpsed her watching the twins with a soft, wondering expression as though she could hardly believe they were real. The party was simple, just a small gathering of neighbors and a couple of the girls' classmates. But to Henry, it felt like something far more important. It was proof that life had not only continued after all the secrets and revelations, but had grown into something more honest and resilient. He carried a tray of lemonade out to the yard, pausing to take in the sight of all three girls crouched around the gift table, whispering about which package to open first. When they noticed him watching, they grinned and waved him over. Haley stepped aside to give the twins space as they tore open the wrapping paper, but Ellie reached out and tugged her back down beside them. Henry felt a lump in his throat as he watched the three of them sit shoulder to shoulder, their heads bent together over a box of paints and brushes. He thought of how afraid he had been that the girls would feel betrayed or that they would reject Haley as an intruder. Instead, they had found something in her that they hadn't even known they were missing. After the cake, vanilla with thick pink frosting and the words, "Family is love," carefully piped across the top. Everyone lingered in the yard, reluctant to break the spell of the warm afternoon. When most of the guests had gone home, Henry sat on the back steps, watching the girls chase each other across the grass with the kind of shrieking delight that only children could sustain. Haley eventually collapsed on the lawn, breathless and laughing, and the twins flopped down beside her, their small hands reaching to pull her into another hug. Later, as twilight fell and the fireflies began to flicker among the hedges, Ellie climbed into his lap and rested her cheek against his shoulder. Her hair smelled of sunshine and frosting. For a while, she didn't say anything, just sat there watching Haley and Sarah gather up discarded plates and napkins. Then she turned her face up to his, her eyes luminous in the dim light, and asked the question that somehow felt like the final piece of something they had all been building together. "Daddy, do you think Mommy would be happy that Haley is here with us?" The question caught him off guard. For a moment, he had to close his eyes, pressing his cheek against the top of her head as he let the ache of missing Laura pass through him. He thought of the letter she had left, of the regret in her words, but also the fierce love she had felt for the girls. When he looked at Ellie again, he was certain of his answer. "I think she would be very happy," he said quietly. "I think she would be proud of you for loving so big, even when it was scary." Ellie nodded, satisfied, and nestled closer. A breeze stirred the trees along the fence, carrying the mingled scent of fresh-cut grass and the last of the birthday candles. Henry felt something settle in his heart, a quiet, steady conviction that though the truth had broken them open in ways he had never imagined, it had also given them something precious. They were not the family he had once pictured, not the family he and Laura had planned in those hopeful early years. But as he watched Sarah wrap her arms around Haley's waist and Haley bend to kiss her forehead, he knew they were still a family all the same, one bound not by perfect histories or unbroken trust, but by the choice they made each day to stay together. In that moment, he felt that the most astonishing, beautiful truth of all was not that they had survived the heartbreak, but that they had found in one another something stronger than any lie or betrayal, a love resilient enough to grow into a new beginning. And as the girls' laughter rang through the dusk, Henry knew he would never again doubt that love was what made them whole. Brought to you by Millionaire in Love.